History is often described as unpredictable. Discoveries arrive by chance. Institutions respond too late. Authority shifts without warning. From this view, change appears accidental, driven by individuals who happen to be in the right place at the right time. But when examined at a distance, some moments repeat with such regularity that randomness becomes difficult to defend. Certain disruptions do not arrive as surprises at all. They emerge when one system quietly begins to operate beyond the limits of another. The moment when scientific inquiry challenged religious authority is often told as a clash of ideas or personalities. A thinker against a church, evidence against belief, courage against repression. But stripped of its drama, this moment looks less like a conflict of individuals and more like a structural pressure building inside an older system. What changed was not simply what people believed, but how knowledge itself was produced, validated, and circulated. For centuries, religious authority functioned as a comprehensive system. It did not merely govern belief. It organized education, preserved knowledge, defined truth, and maintained social order. Meaning, explanation, and legitimacy flowed through a single structure. Questions about the world were not separate from questions about purpose or morality. They were resolved within the same framework, using the same sources, and enforced by the same institutions. This system worked not because it answered every question correctly, but because it constrained questions to a manageable form. Inquiry was permitted as long as it reinforced the existing structure. Observation was allowed if it confirmed established doctrine. Explanation remained stable because the system controlling meaning also controlled interpretation. Consistency, not accuracy, was the organizing principle. Over time, however, a parallel system began to form. It did not initially present itself as a rival. Early scientific inquiry operated within religious institutions. Monasteries preserved texts. Universities taught natural philosophy under theological oversight. Measurement, observation, and experimentation existed, but they were framed as tools for understanding divine order, not for challenging authority. The tension did not begin with opposition. It began with accumulation. Observation produces data. Data produces anomalies. Anomalies require adjustment. As instruments improved and records expanded, small discrepancies appeared between inherited explanations and observed behavior. At first, these discrepancies were absorbed. Interpretations were refined. Exceptions were explained away. The religious system had evolved to handle variation, but only within limits. Pressure increased as methods of inquiry became more systematic. Repetition replaced singular observation. Measurement replaced description. Prediction became a test of validity. A different structure for producing knowledge was taking shape, one that relied less on authority and more on process. Truth was no longer something received from a source. It was something demonstrated through procedure. This change did not immediately threaten religious authority. In fact, the two systems coexisted for a time. Religious institutions often sponsored scientific work, believing it would ultimately reinforce existing belief. But coexistence masked a deeper incompatibility. The scientific system rewarded results that held regardless of who produced them. The religious system depended on legitimacy flowing from established hierarchy. As scientific inquiry matured, it began to generate explanations that did not require theological framing. Natural phenomena could be described through consistent laws without reference to divine intention. The system of explanation was becoming self-contained. Meaning was no longer necessary for prediction. Purpose was no longer required for understanding mechanism. This shift created an unintended consequence. Authority over explanation began to migrate. When knowledge could be tested independently of institutional approval, control weakened. The religious system still held moral authority, but explanatory authority began to fragment. Truth, once centralized, became distributed across methods and communities. The response was not uniform resistance. In many cases, religious institutions attempted integration. Doctrines were reinterpreted, boundaries were adjusted. Some explanations were conceded while others were defended. This adaptive behavior delayed open conflict, but it could not reverse the structural change already underway. The scientific system had a different constraint profile. It expanded by incorporating error. Failure became productive. Incorrect hypotheses generated refinement rather than rejection of the system itself. In contrast, religious authority relied on stability. Too much revision threatened coherence. The more complex the world appeared through scientific observation, the more strain was placed on a system designed to preserve unified meaning. Over time, the imbalance became visible. Scientific explanations accumulated faster than they could be absorbed. Entire domains of understanding moved outside theological jurisdiction. Astronomy, physics, biology, and later geology developed internal standards of validation. Each field reduced dependence on religious interpretation, not through rebellion, but through operational sufficiency. The consequence was not the collapse of religious belief, but the redefinition of its scope. Authority over the natural world diminished. Religious systems increasingly focused on moral order, ritual, and identity, rather than explanation of physical reality. This was not a decision made in a single moment, but the outcome of sustained pressure. What appears historically as confrontation was often the delayed recognition of structural incompatibility. Two systems had grown interdependent and then diverged. One prioritized continuity and meaning. The other prioritized adaptability and replication. When both attempted to govern the same domain, conflict emerged not because of hostility, but because overlap became unsustainable. This pattern repeats beyond this moment. When systems designed for stability encounter systems optimized for change, authority becomes brittle. Control depends not on intention, but on structural fit. Institutions rarely fall because they are wrong. They weaken when their operating logic no longer matches the environment they govern. As scientific inquiry continued to expand, its influence reshaped education, economics, and governance. Decision-making increasingly relied on technical expertise rather than moral authority. Legitimacy began to derive from effectiveness. This created new systems of control, often opaque, often impersonal, but structurally consistent with a world driven by measurable outcomes. Religious authority did not disappear. It adapted by retreating from domains where it could no longer regulate explanation. Belief became more personal, less institutional. Meaning detached from universal claims about nature and attached itself to individual identity and community cohesion. This adaptation preserved relevance, but at the cost of centralized authority. The long-term consequence was fragmentation. Knowledge became specialized. Authority became distributed. No single system could claim total explanatory control. This increased resilience but reduced coherence. The unified worldview once maintained by religious authority gave way to a landscape of partial systems, each governing its own domain. The fracture emerges when considering what happens after this transition stabilizes. Systems designed for inquiry now dominate explanation, but they do not address meaning. The separation that allowed scientific progress also created a structural gap. Questions once resolved within a single framework are now divided across incompatible systems. When systems outlast understanding, they continue to operate even as their original purpose fades from collective awareness. Scientific methods persist regardless of whether their broader implications are integrated into social order. Religious institutions continue regardless of whether they shape explanation. The division becomes normalized, no longer experienced as tension, but as background condition. This raises a quiet question. If systems evolve through pressure rather than intention, what happens when the structures governing knowledge no longer align with the structures governing meaning? Not as a crisis, but as a stable imbalance. The moment science challenged religious authority was not a singular rupture. It was a transition between systems with different tolerances for change. One yielded explanatory control not because it failed, but because it was not built to expand indefinitely. The other grew, not because it sought dominance, but because its structure rewarded accumulation. History does not move randomly. It moves where pressure finds least resistance. Systems adapt until they cannot. Authority shifts not through argument, but through misalignment. The challenge was never belief versus evidence. It was stability encountering repetition and meaning encountering method. That pattern does not end. It settles, and in settling, it becomes difficult to notice at all. Subscribe to Timeless Questions for more thoughtful journeys into the ideas and forces that shape civilizations and continue to shape us.